Introducing Michaela Thomas. So what happens to us in our performance when we live in uncertain times, given just how much of Stuart's talk highlighted the anxieties we might be suffering, the loneliness, how much support we need. I especially love that the employees feel they need help to deal with their stress as well as homeworking. And considering that Michaela deals with stress, anxiety, perfectionism on daily basis, I could not think of a better person as to follow on to Stuart's presentation. So Michaela, over to you.
So yes, I am a clinical psychologist, and I do specialize in what Nikita mentioned: stress, anxiety, perfectionism, but also couples issues. So the lockdown has been an interesting one for me as a couples therapist, thinking about how people's relationships have been affected. And two of the key concepts I work with a lot are around connection and compassion. So those are the kind of two themes that I've been thinking about of how I've been supporting people throughout this tough time. So I've been thinking about the next chapter working. So rather than thinking of returning to normal, because I don't think we actually can, I don't think we can go backwards with anything in life when we go through hardship or tough experiences. I think we have to focus on going forward into a next chapter. So as this next chapter is unfolding, the data of people like Stuart and other research teams is so important, because they will be the foundation of what we will build the clinical adaptation on top of. So I obviously have a much smaller sample. I don't have thousands of people, but I have worked much more in depth, I guess, where over the last 4 months, 5 months, however long it's actually been now, in my one-to-one therapy clients, I've been seeing some quite clear themes of what's going on. Seeing the data today as well in Stuart's work, I think it's really important to use that metaphor of same storm, different boats, so that we can have empathy and compassion for other people who may not have been experiencing what we've experiencing. So that's what I'm going to keep in mind today. So a little bit about me. First off, I help ambitious people live, love, and work imperfectly. As if we're lowering our standards and embracing imperfection, we can find a bit more balance rather than burnout. So that's obviously what I'm having in the back of my mind as I'm going into this next chapter of working. And I want to start by saying that I'm really worried. I am really, really concerned as a clinical psychologist that we are not seeing the mental health impact just yet. Across the board of clinical services, NHS services helping people with common mental health problems like anxiety, depression, stress, which is my background, where I used to work in primary care psychology before I started my private company, the Thomas Connection. What I'm seeing across the board from people who still work in those services that I have contact with is that their referral rates are really low at the moment. They're starting to pick up, and I'm seeing the same thing across the board with a lot of private psychologists. We're not actually seeing this mental health pandemic hit just yet. And I'm going to focus on that in my talk about why might that be, what's happening in our brains that's causing us to respond the way we are. So some of the things I've been hearing, so this is just not, data as such, this is just stuff I've been hearing as themes. I'm the only one who can't cope. There's a lot of people feeling lonely in their own experience, thinking that means something about them, a sign of defectiveness somehow, that I can't cope, I can't respond to the world like I used to. When will this all end? I feel out of control, it's too uncertain, I can't cope with not knowing, can I go, it can be as small as, will I be able to go on my holiday to Mallorca this year or not, to what's going to happen to my company? Am I going to be made redundant? I'm going to lose my job. For business owners like myself, am I going to lose my company? What's going to happen to us financially? What will happen in my marriage? A lot of these thoughts that people are saying to me, when will the schools open? And as a result, because of that emotional stretchedness that we saw, I have no energy, focus, or motivation. It's a very common thing people have been saying to me. Procrastination seems to be at an all-time high. People are really distracted. And obviously that's partly because they're working in a different setting than they're used to. They're not set things up. But the reality of things is that when schools have been closed or even only partially opened, people have been working on top of their children, or the children have been on top of them when they've been trying to work. And that is not remote working. right? That is not working from home. We have to be really clear that when we evaluate how people have found remote working, we're not talking about remote working really. We're talking about doing the best we can in a global crisis. So I want to urge employers who are thinking about increasing flexibility and remote working to not use this as a measure of evaluating whether that works. So we want to think about people's productivity and performance with a pinch of salt, because it might not be the way it would be if things were sort of back to normal, when things have eased a bit more, when we've beaten this virus. Eventually there will be a vaccine and we have beaten this, and we can think about rebuilding and regrowing. Then we can truly evaluate how do humans take to more remote working. I hope that makes sense. And I'm not going to talk too much about the adaptations we need to make, because I know that Roberta is going to talk about that later, of how we can work from home. But I wanted to just acknowledge that that's a really important caveat. And that's not just for employers, but for you as an employee as well, to not be so hard on yourself if you have no energy, focus, or motivation. That doesn't mean that you're going to struggle forever and after to work from home. You're trying to work from home in a global shitstorm, right? So apologies if swearing is not your thing. This is part of me helping people who are very high striving and perfectionistic to be a little bit looser. So sometimes I swear, so apologies. But a lot of these anxieties are now collectively shared. People are scared to go on public transport. People are scared to sit in the office because of transmission. People are scared that their bosses don't understand their predicament, that they can't work with their kids at home. They may not have the money to send their children back to nursery or childcare, or their childcare settings have closed if they had, say, a nanny or a childminder. Those settings may not have reopened. We can't just throw our child into whatever setting. We may want to wish to return to work, return to childcare that the child was familiar with. So people are missing seeing their friends and family, that sense of connection that Stuart touched upon, the loneliness, isolation, but also the people are really hard on themselves, thinking that what they're doing at work isn't good enough somehow. And that really explains why the number of hours may have gone up for people. Because if we're struggling to focus and concentrate, we might feel that I need to do more face time to get this done. I might have to go over the same task lots of times before I really nail it, or before I can finish this report. And that's then a vicious cycle, because the more you overwork, the less rest and recovery you get. So the more overworked you become, and the less you focus and concentrate. So it's a real hamster wheel issue there that I can see. What also people have been telling me is that they don't want to go back to work like it was before. They want to go back to work in a different way, because they've enjoyed more time with their family, as hard as it's been to be on top of their kids. They have missed being in the office only some of the time. Some people have told me that I'm not missed work at all. I want to continue this forever and after. I've had people who said, I'm going to move to a different country and request to continue working in my London office remotely. So this is really changing the way we work for the future. So the challenge is, what happens to our performance when a global threat is adding to stress and anxiety? Now, this is not a new graph in any way, and I think there are very newer models of this, but I think it's quite a helpful one, because it so simplistically shows us that if we think about peak performance, if we're bored and we don't have enough pressure, as in, no deadlines or no one asking us, no one checking in with us, it doesn't really matter if we meet our targets or not, then obviously we're going to have feeling of being quite mundane. I'm bored, so then we don't get started, and we procrastinate. If we're on the opposite side of high stress levels, feeling really anxious, maybe dissatisfied with the work we do, we're going to switch off as well and procrastinate and not get started, because we're overwhelmed. So you don't want to be underwhelmed, and you don't want to be overwhelmed. Now, we think this is a graph that's used a lot in work performance. But considering the current times, where most of us, even the people who felt quite stable and resilient and strong emotionally before this happened, have found themselves feeling more anxious, feeling more hypervigilant, like on the lookout for danger, because of the campaigns that have been going around. The kind of better safe than sorry principle that the brain operates on means that we've been feeling anxious, right? It's like It's like a car alarm that tries to protect your car from being nicked. We need that car alarm, but at the moment it's super sensitive. Any single gust of wind, like what was that? Someone coughed. What was that? Then your car alarm goes off, right? So we are hyper vigilant because it keeps us safe. And the campaign of sort of staying alert, control the virus, save lives, has been needed in the sense of making people take these precautions seriously, but they in themselves rank up our anxiety levels. So how are we going to expect peak performance when we're in a global shitstorm, right? So instead of whipping ourselves harder and whipping your staff harder, that's counterproductive. You don't actually get more productivity out of your staff if you tell them off. Listening more intently can ease some of that pressure. What's going on for you? So if you have staff that you know actually have no childcare at the moment, you need to listen to them. They are really vulnerable for burnout at the moment. So the avatar or the sort of image of someone really susceptible to mental health issues right now is, for me, a woman in her 30s or early 40s with young children who may have had a long period of homeschooling and now gone into summer holidays. So that's again another 6-7 weeks of having the children at home whilst also being expected to work, and at that point may have used up all of her annual leave trying to juggle work with childcare before coming into summer holidays, hasn't had a break for 6 months. And the reason I'm saying woman rather than man is because we have some really troubling data showing that men and women in heterosexual couples who have been doing the same number of work hours from home during the crisis, women have taken on average 2 hours more of childcare per day on top of working. Now that to me is a recipe for burnout. So those women I want to hold in mind. If you are an employer who have women on your books who you know have children who are nursery, preschool age, so they can't play independently very much, or they have children they have had to homeschool, then please check in with their emotional well-being and don't expect their best peak performance right now, because you don't need to add to that pressure, that stress of I'm already failing as a mother, being shouty, being irritable. We saw what happens when we're overstretched. We might be looking for arguments. So they're trying to motivate their kids at home in a new role of being teacher, which is not really exactly what homeschooling in a global pandemic is. So that's where I think empathy and compassion is really important. That is one avatar of someone who's going to really struggle with this. Another avatar that I've seen is the single person, someone who might have been thriving when they get to see other people. So a very extroverted person who now can't go and do things that they need to do, have nobody they're sharing their home with, and until we could merge into support bubbles, was effectively very alone. Those are the people we also need to check in with, because this mental health crisis is coming. It's not just already here, it is coming and it's going to get worse. I love a good doomsday. Right, but I'm going to explain that there is hope as well, don't worry. So I want to explain why it's not your fault if you've been struggling to concentrate, or if you felt that you were super productive in the beginning of lockdown and you just getting lots of stuff done, putting systems in place, and now you're just super flipping tired. I want to explain why. Because these 3 circles, if you can see them, they're a blue circle for drive, a green circle for soothing, and a red circle for threat. These 3 circles represent emotional systems in our brain. Okay, so our threat system, like I said, the car alarm that's built in to protect you and keep you safe, that gives rise to emotions like anger, anxiety, disgust, and is linked with adrenaline and cortisol flooding your body. So if you're thinking, shit, I'm going to miss the bus, you will run very fast and you will get a surge of these stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. Once you get on the bus, if you make the bus, you will start to slow down again. Your body will naturally regulate and you will start to breathe more and more slowly. So that's built in. If you didn't have your threat system, you wouldn't have made it into adulthood. You would have just died because you wouldn't care about looking both ways before you cross the street. Now, what happens in a global pandemic is that our threat systems are on high alert a lot of the time, and that is exhausting. To begin with, we can actually perform quite well with a spike of adrenaline and cortisol. It's almost like if you'd measure in your blood, it would be going straight up and we get stuff done. We frantically saw people trying to pivot in the beginning of lockdown, trying to figure out how are they going to run their businesses, how are the staff going to work, putting up IT systems for remote working, and also juggling caring responsibilities, looking after their elderly parents who are now not able to go to the shops. At the same time as also thinking about your own children, how are you going to fit working in the house? All of these things were very frantic. As you can hear me speaking like this, because our brains were like, oh my God, why? There was no stop. There was no pause. There was no recovery. There was no rest. Everyone was frantically trying to get stuff done. And what that means is that we might have had a surge of productivity to begin with, but the body can only last so long before it starts to lose focus and feel, I've peaked, I am done. You might feel that if you go for a run, like a lot of people have done during lockdown. If you go for a run, you come to a point where like, I've hit the wall, I can't run anymore, I have to stop, I've peaked, right? This is what happens in our bodies. So that's why during sort of June, July, I collectively heard everyone, my friends, family, clients, other fellow psychologists saying, I'm just so tired. I struggle to get up in the morning. I struggle to get my work done. I can't concentrate. And that is because the surge of adrenaline and cortisol was too much and your systems were starting to shut down. They were being flooded and we can only last for so long. So that's when we think about this threat system that impacting on our drive system, which is us wanting and pursuing things. I want to sit down and produce this thing for work. So I might be feeling driven, motivated. If it's something that is joyous, I might feel excited. It's a reward system. And that's what happens and what kicks in when you check your LinkedIn notifications and you see someone is connected with you. Your brain goes ding, 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 a little hit of dopamine. And that's great for us, it makes us feel good. If this system goes very flat and we're very demotivated, we're not feeling like doing anything, that's the face of depression. Feeling lethargic, no pleasure, no interest in doing things. I'm not bothered. I can't be bothered to cook my food. I don't want to go out for that walk. That's when we feel very flat. And this is something I've been hearing quite across the board in lockdown, that people have been feeling flat in terms of their drive. So that can so the drive system can either go overinflated, and that's where we hit mania, where you actually manically starting to, I need to get these things done. I have so many ideas, I don't know where to start. Versus when we're just about right, that's when we are productive, when we're working through our to-do list, when we're pursuing things, but also enjoying consuming them. So the simplest way of understanding that is when you go to the shops, source your ingredients to cook your meal, cooking it, sitting down to then eat it and enjoying the flavor of it. That's all drive system. That's all reward, right? The last system doesn't get a lot of airspace in work culture because it tends to be about these first two, right? It tends to be about, working hard means that you have to look like you're busy. You have to look like you're frantically running around. Otherwise, you're probably not working hard. So soothing gets a lot of bad rep, even though it's the way in. It's the royal road into our drive system. So soothing is our calm and connected system, where we're kind of content. We're not running away from something scary, or we're not running towards anything that we want and pursue. We're just content as we are. And that might simply look like sitting on the sofa with your spouse and just having a little chat at the end of the day, or you're giving your kid a hug, or lifting them out of the bath and having a little snuggle. It's that kind of stuff. Or you're sitting with a friend and you just, but bitching about something for a bit, and it's just so nice to just sit here together with you. Nothing spectacular is happening. You're never going to broadcast this stuff on the 10 o'clock news. But soothing is what we need for rest and recovery. So it might look like this in every single breath. If you draw a sharp breath in, you activate your threat system. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks in saying, alert, danger. Oh, it was nothing. And I ease out. And my parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. Oh, a sigh of relief. And to me, it feels like we're in that stage of for 4 or 5 months, and we haven't yet done the, it's all over. That's why it's really hard to work at your top performance, because you're still in the threat activation. I hope that makes sense. I'm not monitoring the questions. So Nikita, if anything comes up that you want to clarify around any of these slides, please just let me know and I'm happy to stop and explain. because these things are obviously making sense to me, but they're quite new to other people. So I wanted to just touch upon this performance paradox that I often teach about to corporates, to create a more compassionate work culture where we have a higher likelihood that people will feel fulfilled, feeling like there's a sense of reward from their work, where they truly are in their drive system rather than a threat-infused drive where we're working for fear of failure or working for fear of being told off. So balanced working means that we are more likely to get started, as in we procrastinate less, we can get going. We're more likely to keep going because we're not overwhelmed, so we're not likely to give up. And we're more likely to finish because we have had the persistence and tenacity from that balance, from that soothing way of working, that we can then actually complete a task. And the overall performance then improves because less is effectively more. If you take the pressure off yourself and thinking, I want to work in a more balanced way where I'm truly hitting my drive system, then that will be much more rewarding. So how is this important in the global crisis? Well, it is important because we have to acknowledge the brains we've got. We can't work with the brain we wish we had. We have to work with the brain we actually have. And that means, owning all your shortcomings and owning all your strengths. So what is the antidote to what's currently going on? Well, my thought, and again, I don't have thousands of responders to this, so this is my thought based on applied psychology, working in depth with people, is connection and compassion. So if you are feeling disconnected, it might be that you're disconnected from other people, it might be you're disconnected from your own purpose, you're not working in the way you want to work, you're disconnected from your own feelings, you've been working on adrenaline for 4 months, so you've completely gone numb and not acknowledging how you're actually feeling. And we need to have compassion because we need to feel for what others are going through, even if their journey and experience is very different to our own. So the two avatars I mentioned, the woman who's overworking and juggling childcare and doing more of the household chores than her husband in a hetero couple, versus the single person living isolated and maybe working too much because there's nothing else better to do. Very different boats, but the same it's still in the same storm. So we need to have compassion for that. And one way to simply understand what compassion is that it's, and I wish I'd done a slide for this, is that the research definition is a sensitivity to the suffering of yourself and other people with a commitment to alleviate it and prevent its return. Now that's quite lengthy because when we define things for research, it has to be quite prim and proper. But what that actually means is that you're sensitive to what you're going through. Means that you're noticing, how am I feeling? What's going on for me? And you're noticing also your journey up to this point. So given everything I know about myself and my brain and how I function and how my personality, given everything I know about myself, doesn't it make sense that I'm having a hard time right now? If the answer is yes, then that's you turning towards yourself with compassion. So that's the first part of it. That is the empathy base, taking the perspective of others or yourself and caring about what you find, giving a damn about your own pain. But if we only do that, then we're still stationary. We're not taking action. We're not doing anything different about it. So the second part of compassion is to take compassionate action, having a commitment to try to make it better. So given everything I know about myself, doesn't it make sense that I'm struggling right now? Yes, it does. So what can I do that would be helpful rather than harmful too much towards myself right now? And it's the same question from an employer to their staff. Given everything I know about this member of staff and their current situation, and I only know that because I asked, what's going on for you? How is your childcare arrangement? How are your stress levels? I only know because I ask. And given everything I know about them, doesn't it make sense that they're struggling to perform right now, that they're struggling to deliver this piece of work that I need? Or doesn't it make sense that they made this quite massive mistake? That's where compassion comes in. And that doesn't mean you take people off the hook or you take yourself off the hook or that you pity yourself. It means that you're meeting yourself where you're at and gently, kindly trying to encourage yourself to take compassionate action. What can I do to take myself forward? Does that make sense so far, I hope? So this is not a Venn diagram, don't worry. But I think it kind of in some ways, if you add compassion and connection together, you get a lot of love. But I think that's the answer to our disconnection is compassion right now, that if you know someone who's alone, you know someone who's struggling, reach out. Ask them, how are you doing? How are you actually doing? I'm not seeing you on the weekly Zoom pub quiz for a while. You know, is everything okay? How are you feeling? How are you coping with X, Y, and Z? How's your mum? Or knowing that someone has lost someone. We know from the data that, was it 5%, I think Stuart said, people have lost someone they loved in COVID. So then that's grief. And if someone is going through grief, that is one of the most traumatic, painful things we can experience as human beings. And we cannot be expected to perform at our best. So this is why we have compassionate leave as a term. Okay. So I wonder if someone has just unmuted themselves. If you could just mute yourself again. It's getting a bit of background noise. So the framework I work with either in corporate cultures, in one-to-one work, or on my courses, is pause, purpose, and play. And I'm going to just briefly touch upon why that's important at the moment, because if we're never pressing pause and we're constantly in a threat state at the moment, which may become, after a significant period of time, might start to affect our traits, like Stuart mentioned. If we're in this threat state, we need to do something to meet ourselves where we're at. So the way to soothe threat is to press pause and go, oh, and just really slowly breathe out. And just doing that a number of times during the day, as many times as you can acknowledge, as many times as you can. So I wonder if we can just spare 1 minute for this right now. And I've got one of these handy little sand timers that I hope you can see. And this is a 1 minute timer. You can buy them on Amazon. If you don't want to be sort of high tech with apps and stuff, get a sand timer. And literally just for 1 moment, I just want you to do 2 things. We're going to spend 2 minutes on this. So as I turn this over, I want you to just start to count your breaths. Okay? So just breathing normally, not slowing down, just breathing normally as you would, and just count the number of breaths, and that one breath is in and out. So count how many of those you get. And just notice, are you feeling stressed by this? Is the act of just taking 1 minute to count making you feel rushed, impatient? Then just notice that. Okay, so that was 1 minute. Try to take to the chat window if you feel comfortable. There's no judgment. There is no right or wrong. Just put in your number. How many breaths per minute did you have? Let's see if I can see the chat. Okay, so there's a real range there. But pretty clear that all of you are in the double digits. There was one person who was on 9, but other than that, it's a range from sort of 13 to 25, 26, something like that. Okay, so you don't have to put them in anymore now. I want to just acknowledge that was the number you had when you're doing something where you're sitting down already. So you're not overstretching your body and your system very much. You're not running around trying to frantically get work done. This is probably less emotionally taxing on you in some ways. And still, your heart rate is probably quite high simply by the number of breaths per minute you have. So I'm going to do it again. So humor me again, and we're going to just start to breathe in a way that I'll try to guide you through. So taking a deep breath in through your nose. And slowly release it out through the nose. And in again through the nose. In again through the nose. And out. Experiment with blowing it out through your mouth. See if that makes any difference. And just try to slow down the out breath. And last one. And now just notice how you feel. If you feel any different when you did about 5.5 breaths per minute, which is what the research suggests is most activating of our soothing system, where you kick in your parasympathetic nervous system saying, essentially, I'm okay. Essentially, I am safe right now. Essentially, if I can sit here and breathe at 5-6 breaths per minute, that tells my brain that, you know what, then I'm not under threat. You know what, then I'm not actually being attacked or acutely in emergency state right now. So I would just love to hear from people just popping in the chat, if you feel comfortable to even just doing a smiley face or a sad face. Smiley face is, I feel better or calmer after breathing like that compared to my normal breathing. And then just to kind of see, how is this making you feel? Just to slow down for 1 minute. Much calmer, smiley face, some with noses, some without. I use this method every night to calm down after the day. I love a bit of meditation. And you know what? I wasn't even meditating with you. I was asking you to slow down your breathing for 1 minute. We are never so busy in our work that we can't press pause for 1 minute. And I would not like to work in a workplace where my employer would be mad at me for taking 1 minute to refocus, to reset, to calm down my nervous system so I can then come back into the work that I'm doing. So this is a really helpful thing because you can have it on your desk as a visual reminder to press pause. And it also means that you're not likely to be distracted by your phone, because I love apps, they're great, but they're also meaning that you're more attached to your phone, whereas you can put your phone in flight mode and get this out there and then just try to work with that. So this is the first part. If we don't press pause, how are you going to notice how you feel? How are you going to notice the contrast between stressed and relaxed? You might, if you did a couple of more minutes of this, you might notice what your body is doing, that it starts to spread out more on the chair. You start to sink down a bit more deeply into the chair because you pressed pause. So essentially, all of us sitting here watching this right now are essentially safe, because you couldn't be dying from COVID and sat at this presentation. You couldn't be acutely ill at the moment whilst you're sitting here. So we want to say, essentially, I am safe. So that's my first bit. The second part is connecting with purpose. And some of the lessons of lockdown, as I call this, have been very painful, and some of them have been very helpful. A lot of people are telling me I had no work-life balance before COVID. I never saw my family. I was in the office until late in the evening, and the nanny picked up the kids, or I relied on my spouse doing that, and I was given a lot of friction in my relationship. It was suffering. Or I was spending money on things I didn't need, relying on a high salary to keep maintaining that lifestyle. But I was unhappy. My job was essentially costing me more than it was worth in terms of emotional and physical health. I lived to work. I didn't work to live. So now the helpful lessons that have come out of this for people that I'm speaking to is that they're realizing I can only do what's humanly possible without childcare, for instance, or without guidance or what I'm supposed to be working on. And that they work better with a better quality of life. The performance goes up when they take frequent breaks, like I showed you with the sort of 1 minute timer of breathing. And when life is stripped back to what matters most to us, our values, our purpose, often it's our connections to others, connections to our hobbies, connections to other people, so social connections, connections to family. Is connecting with purpose means we're living a more meaningful life. So I can follow my ambition without drowning in it. I can still do what's purposeful for me at work, but my life overall will be more meaningful. So that brings me to, how do we go forward with adapting to these weird circumstances? We need to flexibly adapt to these challenges rather than follow rigid rules. So I often think of softening a should into a could. So we should all work in an office 5 days a week. Well, we could all work in an office 5 days a week when that feels safe. But perhaps it's not either or. It's not either we all work together or we're all on remote working. It's about flexibly adapting to who you are as an individual. What do you need to thrive? What do you need to be able to show up at work, to complete your targets, or meet your goals at work, to perform better? Like Stuart showed in his data, it might be that some people need to be in the office more so than not because of their individual living circumstances or because of how they get easily distracted. Or some people might need some intervention to be able to help them work more effectively from home. Some people might need to work more from home than not, because that will make their life more overall balanced and they'll be happier and they'll actually feel more like this is a workplace I can stay. This is a workplace I can put my roots down in. So this is where we think about if you bend, you won't break. It's like if you have rigidity and you kind of think of try and find a pen. If you have this is my stylus pen, so I'm not going to break it. So if you have rigidity that I should be like this, or we must work in this fashion, and then you apply pressure, which is, we're in a pressure pandemic at the moment. If you apply pressure to something that's very rigid, it will break. If you are able to bend and be flexible, and you apply rigid or you apply pressure to something that is flexible and able to bend, like what hours you work in the week or where you work in the week, you can adapt and mold to it like this cord. You can turn to every eventuality and face it more resiliently. So we want to focus on growing from this. This is not over. This is by no means over. But when it will be over, we would have all had adaptations in our brains. You can go and Google post-traumatic growth as a concept, which is fascinating, which shows us that when humans go through painful experiences, our brains adapt and grow, and we come out differently at the other end. So we want to focus on that growth of how can we do this? If I can't do this yet, how can I do this? If I can't work well remotely yet, that key word is yet, what do I need to be able to work better remotely? For instance, we want to focus on growth rather than hardship and self-criticism. And in order to do that, we need to be kinder to ourselves. We need to be thinking about how we have all gone through a collectively shared experience of hardship, and we are still in a collectively shared experience of hardship with uncertainty of, will there be a second wave? Will there be more lockdown? All of that uncertainty is beyond our control. So your brain is still trying to process it, give it time and compassion. It is trying to do its best, trying to keep you safe. So being kind to yourself means that you turn towards yourself with self-correction rather than self-criticism. Trying to improve and grow, but not saying, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? That's not self-corrective, that's self-critical. So we want to try to be kind to ourselves, because then we're more likely to also be kind to others. We're more topped up. And lastly, I mentioned pause, purpose, and here is the play. I'm not going to do too much of this because some people find it irreverent, and that's often when they're too much in the threat system already. But refreshing your mind of the 3 circles, that if we are soothing ourselves, if we're slowing down, pressing pause, taking deeper breaths, slower breaths, you all had smiley faces. Smiley faces means more play, more fun, more vitality, more joy. And you know what? I like my job. My job gives me a great sense of joy and fulfillment because I also have a lot of fun. This has been fun. I'm having fun playing right now, talking about concepts. It doesn't have to all be serious just because the world has gone serious. We can still find play, even if it's not in the workplace. You can still find play outside of work, to do things to take the pressure off, to release from it and not take things quite as seriously. That will help you go back into the serious things with renewed energy and purpose. So lastly, coming to the end of my talk, I've completely lost track of what I'm supposed of the time. It is ridiculously hot in here. So we need to think about opening up. I'm just going to see if Nikita's sending me a helpful timer of when I'm supposed to finish. Not yet. So what we want to do is to aim for connection and not perfection, that we are all having the same experience, even though we have different boats, we're in the same storm. So if you feel anxious, if you feel stressed, actually encouraging you to speak to your GP for a referral for mental health input, because you know what? There's actually a lot less pressure on these services at the moment than there normally is. So we're all anticipating that the services for psychological well-being will be inundated with referrals, and lots of people have been telling me, oh, I'm not going to seek any help because I'm not having the hardest time, so other people should go ahead of me. So then effectively, everyone being this kind, nobody's seeking help. So open up. If you have mental health problems right now, and I don't think it's either you have mental health problems or you don't, I think we're all on a spectrum of mental health where we all have times where we feel anxious, low, down, or stressed. Open up, talk to other people, and you will find that deeper connection comes from you showing vulnerability, showing your flaws, showing your imperfections, saying, I'm really anxious about going to shops these days because I don't want to wear a face mask. I'm really worried, and then I don't go out because of that, and now I feel really isolated. Do you feel that too? And like, you know what? Lots of people feel the same way too. So we're more likely to connect and make deeper friendships with others when we are vulnerable. Now that stopped moving. There we are. So like I mentioned, we want to take compassionate action. We want to implement. We can't just notice what hurts and say, well, that makes sense. It's not my fault. We want to also translate it into action. So if you are employed somewhere, discuss with your employer what you need and what you want to continue feeling fulfilled and balanced at work. Kind of the principle is don't ask, don't get. So take action for yourself. Put yourself first. Go to your boss and say, you know what, I've really enjoyed the increased autonomy and flexibility of working from home. Is there any chance we can return or continue with a bit of working from home now that I've got all the IT support set up, etc.? What do you need to continue to feel that this is a workplace I want to keep going to? And if you have staff, if you are the employer, the same thing goes. What do they need? What do they want to continue to feel fulfilled? Start the conversation. Change the dialogue. Don't assume that they just have to deliver. Talk to them. It's surprisingly or deceptively simple, but surprisingly powerful and effective to take that action. So if you want more help and support on how to do that, if you're an employer, you don't know how to sensitively do that, I do that kind of consultancy, just talking to employers of how do we change the dialogue, how do we have more compassionate leadership, how do we create a more thriving, compassionate culture where we step away from just the productivity mindset and more about how do we have shared goals, values, and purpose as an organization. Because, I love this quote, it takes courage to say yes to rest and play in a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. We don't want to promote burnout because not only is it unkind and inhumane to push staff into burnout, it's actually really, really expensive as well. So for you in terms of an employer, if you have presenteeism, absenteeism, all of these things, whether we know from some of these studies like the ones from Deloitte, it's very expensive to have a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. Just don't do it. So thank you very much. Oh, I've completely lost track of myself, but you know what? This is what happens when you're passionately in your purpose. You just dive right in and you get a little bit, maybe a little bit overextended, as Nikita would say, in terms of how you deliver. So if you want to connect with me in any way, I'm on all the social media platforms under the Thomas Connection. I can share my LinkedIn profile as well. If you want to start having conversations with me about how you can change the dialogue in your workplace, or if you need one-to-one support, then you can reach out to me as well. And I've got a new podcast that's launching this week called Pause, Purpose, Play, where I talk to ambitious entrepreneurs and professionals about how they can let go of the pressure of perfection to find more balance over burnout. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you, Michaela. I mean, that was just perfect. And I don't know about you good people, but I definitely feel a bit calmer. And it only takes a minute. And I'm definitely going to buy one of these handy watches, not watches, sand clocks, because I think that should do the trick. And a minute sounds reasonable. Some mindfulness stuff says 15 minutes. And I'm just like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this kind of a commitment. But 1 minute sounds like it's perfect for my low conscientiousness. And thank you so much for the practical tips and the connections. Are you happy for people to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. So if you feel that you want to ask questions that you don't feel comfortable to do in front of others, again, vulnerability is important, but it's also really scary. So I understand that you may want to just send me a direct message instead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Michaela. So what are your takeaways before we go to the next talks? If you can go into menti.com, 91 51 7, and if you can just jot down your key takeaways from this talk, that'd be absolutely wonderful. And we can see quite a bit of engagement on the chat as well, which is perfect. So if you can go into Menti, 91 51 7, and just jot down key reflection takeaways from this session. Take a minute to breathe slowly, reset, refocus, and re-energize. Sounds like a good statement there. Practical tips. It only takes 1 minute. Yep, that's the fun part. The longest journey starts with the smallest step. And if your self-care journey starts with a minute for yourself, so be it. Encouragement of compassion, how important is to take more time for yourself. Yes, 1 minute seemed to really have rang a bell. And for me, working from home during a shitstorm definitely sticks. So, and to the point. And burnout being expensive. Bend not to break. Wonderful. And so much good points about self-care. And that it might get worse now, and asking for help. And asking help of trained staff, like go to GP and ask them for help, and they'll be provided to refer you. The services are not as loaded as now as they might be later.